So in my mind, it was more what's an instruction or what's an attribute of an existing instruction.
Yeah, that's a good.
So if you look at like the IA64, they have these acquire release barriers that they can put on load and store instructions to provide sort of half memory barriers, which is a bit different than providing a full memory barrier. It allows a little more fine-grained control over what memory accesses can be moved beyond those barriers, and potentially opens up more room for optimization because you're not as constrained. So, what forms do we think that this should take? Do we want to go down that path? Do we want to try and take a very generic sort of memory barrier type approach, memory barrier intrinsic?
Well, I have two comments. One, specifically what you're talking about is memory barrier. So coming from Java, Java memory model does actually have more than just the memory barrier. It has quite a release models, and thus actually having that control is really, really useful. I don't know if that's applies to.
So you're saying having the extra control?
Having extra control leads to better and basically better running code in this case. And the other thing also about the intrinsic versus the instruction is that sure, inside of the compiler, that difference, is an architectural one. But the key thing is that the people using these are probably going to be not compiler writers, but basically the API writers writing on top of this. And so it's a matter of like, well, if it's already not there, what's the easiest way for them to get it into LLVM? Not what's the easiest way for you guys to maintain it or to compile the code if there's something that they're not supporting already, if it's an intrinsic versus instruction. I don't know. Which one's easier? Yeah.
I think maybe we do need support for things like thread, fork, and join if you want to do automatic parallelization. So you have to be able to understand how to threads communicate, how the memory model, where this different thread writes, when it's safe for the other thread to read and things like that. If you're going to pass data from one thread to the other, you have to add a little bit more than just the atomic operation memory barriers to the language.
Actually, it sort of occurs to me you're going to have to do most of it. A chunk of this is going to have to be done anyway because of the OpenNP support that's in GCC. So a memoization facility that, as stage one is, okay, here are all the thread-based memos that we, stuff in there, and it becomes, you don't want to obviously make a memoization facility become too extensible because that's everything plus the kitchen sink. But it seems like, if you can certainly augment with memos, it might actually be something relatively successful and extensible.
Yeah, I think that might be a really good way to go. For my part, as far as by memoization, I assume you mean sort of attribution of the IR or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Here's my PC memo instruction stream, and then of course the backends can do with it what they want.
So we've actually had this argument in LLVM before, and we've got a class called annotation.
Right.
And we're trying to get rid of it.
Well, yeah, but you could consider alignment information, although the source of the annotation is also valid.
Right, but the point is that they're not right? They're actually.
But that's a terminology issue. So calling something an annotation, it really depends on how it's implemented. And we don't want to support arbitrary annotations of random crap on the IR, which is where no offense to people who want to support random crap on the IR. But
so as long as it's specific, then we can attach those attributes to particular things. The thing is, if it's just a random thing and people dump random information in there, who does anything with it? None of the backends are going to end up supporting it because it's random. Right? So
well, you obviously have to make them fairly well defined. I mean, I'm not saying just put arbitrary crap in there because.
So what I'm saying is that if you're going to make them well defined, then you might as well make them, very real attributes of the IR.
Sure.
So,
but you have to start with an extensible attribution structure to begin with, which sort of exists. But
I mean, would you consider the bit code format to be sort of extensible as you would extend attribution? Extending an opcode or extending an instruction in the bit code format is pretty extensible, from what I understand, right? So the way when I was doing the alignment stuff, which is adding basically new information to the load and store stuff, I was basically adding information to an existing opcode. If one considers that extensibility, then yeah, I'd say that the entire IR is pretty extensible, right?
being done.
So I think specifically, looking from the Java memory model, there were 4 things that I was thinking about. And that's the 4 types of memory barriers that they sort of require you to map somehow onto your ISA, and that's the load, store load, and store memory barriers. The IA64 acquire release stuff basically provides that, but grouped into 2, which are a little bit more strict. And we could, probably should have a discussion about what's the sort of the minimum set we want to support that really makes sense, how that would interact with any sort of atomic primitive that we want to put in the language or attribute onto existing instructions. But that was basically my starting point was, if we wanted to support the memory model that Java has come to, we need to have something like this in the IR to represent either through intrinsics or through attributes on existing instructions. We'd have to have some way to represent these memory barriers to actually generate proper code.
Well, I was just going to point you in the direction of some work that SGI did with the MIPS chip, and they had a thing they called nanothreads, which were more primitive level, closer to the hardware architecture of which pthreads then resided on top of. But the direction that they were moving in sounds very much like what you're talking about in terms of how can you support a threaded environment in a more efficient way.
Okay.
One comment I'll make is just adding memory barriers to LLVM is actually going to be more tricky than it sounds because different processors have different semantics for memory barriers. For instance, some of them order all writes before the barrier with all memory operations after. Some order reads and writes with all operations after. We actually have all possible combinations that exist out there.
Yeah, so certainly it wouldn't just be as easy as adding the attributes to the syntax. You'd have to make the optimization passes, respect them, and you'd have to get the backends to lower them onto the correct memory barrier operations for that specific target. The cookbook for the Java memory model, I think, for that would be a great place because they've had to do it for all their JVMs and all these targets, and they go through the matrix of, well, these are the instructions you can use for these memory barriers, and these are the special cases you have to watch out on these architectures and things like that. But
yeah, except that the front end we're using is eventually going to have OpenMP in it, which basically means that the Java stuff is well nigh useless. So you have to then sort of figure out, okay, what's the best merge between the two?
Well, specifically with the memory barrier stuff, the Java stuff, from what I understand, is pretty much strictly more conservative than what C and C++ implement right now. I don't know about C++ OX.
And ideally, we find the common set of primitives that are useful for less implementation.
Yeah.
So the idea,
something that's supportable.
The idea had was sort of going for what ISAs you can implement because we've been able to map C and Java down onto these ISAs. They have some sort of subset that's at least minimally functional for these kind of queries. So.
Yeah, well, I don't think the answer is to reach a solution right now, but it's to raise the issue, and now lots of people are thinking about it, and we can discuss it over breaks. And
Absolutely.
Yeah, it sounds like someone needs to take the lead and just figure out what all the application, different styles of multi-threading are, and then what the target support is sort of synthesize what we need in the middle for LLVM.
One thing that just think about many architectures having different memory barriers. It seems like x86, where if you write and then read, it's always valid. There is no memory barrier. You could argue that the code generation could just not emit anything.
Correct.
But it would be interesting also that previous optimizations use the fact that there is no memory barrier to do the correct optimization. So it looks like it should be something that targets have represented higher level optimization can look down and see for which architecture is going on, which is kind of unfortunate.
I think one of the things for potentially representing these barriers in the language is that it sort of happens to some extent at target lowering time or when you lower onto the back end, which of these become no ops or which of them actually have to be co-generated into barriers themselves on the host. Any other discussion points? If not, we'll take up more discussion on the list.